She's given me the one.
Good morning, sir. Good morning.
Okay.
Morning, can we start? It's already 9:06.
Well, yes, ma'am. We'll start now, ma'am. Just a moment.
Good morning to one and all present here. On the behalf of the Department of English, PSG Krishnamal College for Women, I'm delighted to welcome you all to this momentous virtual occasion, an international seminar on recent trends in children's literature. Let us begin this fruitful academic conclave. Now, I invite Dr. Sushil Mary Matthews, Associate Professor and Head, Department of English, PSG Krishnamal College for Women, to welcome the virtual gathering.
Thank you. Good morning. Dr. S. Chitra, Professor of English, Royal University of Bhutan. Dr. Anto Thomas, Professor. Chairperson, Dr. Nandini. Secretary, Dr. N. Yashoda Devi. Principal, Dr. S. Nirmala. Esteemed resource persons, directors, deans, heads of departments, faculty, delegates, students, good morning to one and all. It gives me great pleasure to welcome you all to this one-day international seminar on recent trends in children's literature. Our college, PSG Krishnamal College for Women, has yet another milestone achievement in this academic year, 21-22, the award of A++ grade by NAC with a score of 3.71 in the fourth cycle of accreditation, and securing 6th position in the country among colleges in the NIRF ranking 2021, announced recently by the Ministry of Education, Government of India. Our special respects to the founders of our institution, Sri G.R. Govindrajulu and Srimati Chandrakanti Govindrajulu, and our thanks to our Managing Trustee, Sri G. Rangaswamy, and Chairperson, Dr. R. Nandini, for all their support and encouragement. Our Secretary, Dr. N. Yashoda Devi, Principal, Dr. S. Nirmala, and Dr. R. Padmavati, Dean, Alumni Relations and Student Support, for all their guidance in our activities, and especially in bringing this seminar to fruition. Welcome you all. Recent trends in children's literature. Trends have the power to create lifelong readers. As academicians, it's important to know that current children's literature trends and be reading the relevant books in order to recommend them to the youth. An inquiry into recent trends and the implications reveal the increasing influence of visual culture and continuing concerns about cultural diversity. While the impact on children's literature due to cultural influences has been apparent throughout the decades, current trends center mostly on digital and technological advances in our society. Contemporary books are products of changing times that require new understanding about the text and are well suited for teaching and preparing students to be multi-literate individuals. The multi-literate individuals are socially responsible, informed citizens who are flexible and strategic as they engage in literary practices with a variety of text types in a diverse world. It was discovered that the students develop their ability to interpret visual images, their digital literary skills, and the ability to think critically. Each of these skills is important to prepare students for future encounters with both print and digital texts. Let me at the outset give my hearty congratulations to the team who worked for this under Dr. Madangi and for bringing this to pass. At this momentous occasion, let me welcome our keynote speaker, Dr. S. Chitra, an assistant professor in English at Yonfula Centenary College, Royal University of Bhutan, Currently, she teaches master's program in English, supervises research scholars, and serves as program leader for academics and research. She holds 2 decades of tertiary teaching experience. Her service record includes teaching expertise in areas of English literature and language, along with curriculum design and course development. She has given several invited talks, both in India and abroad. She is an IELTS trainer, training the trainers, and she is certified by British Council for the same, and is also part of ESOL examinations, which is also certified by the University of Cambridge. She visited USA for her postdoctoral work, and her doctoral thesis is titled The Phoenix Rises, a study of Bernard Malamud's novels. She has published 10 books, 10 articles, and presented in 50 plus national and international conferences. She has served as resource person in workshops, in leadership training, enhancement of LSRW skills, report writing, among several others, and interestingly, also an assessment survey of teaching learning during COVID-19 crisis. We are fortunate to have Dr. Chitra with us. She's always been a good friend and help of the English department of PSGR Krishnamal College, and I want to record our thanks to her. And I'm sure all of you will benefit tremendously from listening to her. We also have amidst us Dr. Anto Thomas Chakramakul, Associate Professor and Head of the Department of English and Research Center, St. Thomas College, Thrissur. We are immensely grateful to you, sir, for having accepted our invitation and helping us with all the arrangements, as children's forte is his forte. Children's literature is his forte. He has delivered 25 keynote addresses and is on several academic boards. He's also a member of the search committee for recruitment of teachers. He has completed 5 research projects. And let me give you the details of one that interested me the most. The University Grants Commission of India's major research project, awarded for the collection and documentation of Indian lullabies to a tune of rupees 7,92,000. He is also the recipient of several UGC International Travel Grant Awards. Sir has also the Fulbright Professional Fellowship from the National Center for Study of Children's Literature, San Diego State University, USA, and has also been part of the Indo-French Cultural Exchange Fellowship. Dr. Anto has also been on our Board of Studies and is a mentor to our department and has helped us in curriculum development. Thank you so much, sir. Let me also take this opportunity to welcome all our resource persons who have agreed to be chairs for the technical sessions. Dr. Pankaj Gogay, Dr. Nagaraju Mandle, Dr. Pallavi Jha, Dr. Sushma Mishra, Dr. Bulbul Gupta, and our very own Dr. Sumati Ramu, Dr. Bhuvana, and Dr. Nila, who have consented to chair the technical sessions. Welcome you all. I'm also happy to welcome the Director of Office of the International Relations, Director of the School of Management Studies, Deans of various capacities, heads of all the departments, the faculty members for all the encouragement, especially Dr. R. Padmavati, who is the former head of the Department of English, and she helps us in all our activities. Thank you so much, ma'am. I record my gratitude to you here. I also welcome the faculty of the Department of Aided Program of English and the head and the faculty members of the Self-Financing Program of English of PSGR Krishnamal College for Women. I deem it my great pleasure to welcome the delegates from various institutions who have joined us from different regions across the country to participate in this seminar. And I thank the principals of all those institutions for permitting them to do the same. and I wish you all have a day of fruitful learning and sharing of knowledge. I also welcome the research scholars and students who are sure to benefit from the exchange of views about children's literature and the recent trends. Thank you all very much.
Thank you, ma'am, for the warm welcome. Now, I request Dr. S. Chitra, Faculty and Head, Postgraduate Department of English, Yonpula Centenary College, Royal University of Bhutan, to deliver the inaugural address.
Yes. It's always a pleasure to be associated with PSGR Krishnamal College for Women, and especially the Department of English. It's a joy to listen to Dr. Sushil Mary Matthews, and I'm pleased to be introduced by her. My utmost gratitude goes to the convener, the administrators of the college, the management members, and to each and every individual in the Department of English, including the HOD and other members whom I have befriended during my rapport with this department in academic terms. By registering this gratitude, let me devote my time to this conference, to this inaugural session. Thank you for having me, first of all, and I wish you all the best. It is always a joy to all the academic endeavors that the college is coming up with, and especially this conference that is on children's literature is really a milestone, as mentioned by Dr. Sushil. It is a milestone in every one of our lives. How can we forget our childhood? And this is also becoming a milestone as a literary field of study in academia. And that is yet another field to be explored with much joy, and also with certain challenges and complexities, which is what I'm planning to deal with today. And here I would like to register, after listening to the introduction about the keynote speaker, Professor Anto Thomas, we are already, I could see the connection, the Lullaby project, which Madam mentioned. And here I would like to mention about the collection of folk tales, the collection and documentation of folk tales I did as a project in Bhutan. It is based on Bhutan. There are many folk tale collections, but with reference to the eastern region where my college is located, this collection has been done and documented. In another platform, I would like to share about it, though folk tales and lullabies also fall under this genre of children's literature. With this, let me share my screen. Hope it's visible.
Yes, yes, Dr. Chitra, yes, it's visible. Thank you.
Okay. So I also would like to request one of the members to remind me of the time later if I am exceeding the limit of my time, or 10 minutes or so before the appointed time. You can remind me if I'm exceeding the limit.
Okay.
I was wondering what kind of title and what text should I choose to talk about pertaining to this field. And especially it comes with a challenge. It is not open by saying you can talk about anything and everything related to children's literature, recent trends. So that is fixing me in. Then I have to do my brainstorming in order to come up with an innovative title. As I mentioned earlier, the joy of childhood is immense for all of us. Even if it is a broken toy, that is a treasure and a pleasure for every child. It erases all differences, the economic differences, the class differences during childhood. And that is the most precious moment, and anything that is simple becomes precious for children. When I started thinking along these lines, the first part of my title shaped in my head, that is Kinder Joy. The kindergarten and the nursery rhymes cannot be forgotten, and today's generation are tempted and enticed by Kinder Joy. So that came up as the first part of my title, Kinder Joy Paradox. Yes, it is not just Kinder Joy. There is a paradox, hidden paradox in it. Then I moved on to my domain to address the recent trends. There is a shift in emphasis, which we all could certainly see. And this emphasis is moving from one domain to another domain. It moves from affective domain, that is the socio-emotional skills of children, which is largely known as the affective domain. From this, we are moving towards cognitive domain with critical discourses emerging in this new field. As a result, the cognitive criticism and the cognitive challenges and complexity also makes this field open to debates. Therefore, from socio-emotional, I'm moving to the psychological and the political aspects of this domain in children's literature. So with this brief introduction about the topic and the phrases that I have used in this topic, without much ado, let me move on to the presentation starting from now. Yes, to begin with, I rework this domain, children's literature, by first leading you into the familiar domain, which we are all familiar with as members of literature, this genre, this field of literature. So oceans of ink have been spent to define literature. A scholar, a particular scholar, Aidan Chambers, she has defined literature as it belongs to all people all the time, that it ought to be cheaply and easily available, that it ought to be fun to read, as well as it is challenging, subversive, refreshing, comforting, and all the other qualities we claim for it goes into it. Yes, we obviously agree to it. But while associating this observation about literature with the subject of children, we tend to remove the conditional phrase, that is, which I have underscored. We tend to remove this conditional phrase ought to be due to our apparent belief that children's literature is a matter of pure and private delight. It is a matter of pure delight and it is a matter of private delight. This once again takes us back to the question, what is children's literature? Maybe in simple terms, it can be called books written for children in which other children were heroes and heroines. In this sense, when we say children's, what is that awkward little possessive yes? It indicates that the books belong to them, it is for them, but it does not mean that it is written by them, with the exception of young writers among children. So now comes the positioning of this literature. Though this genre sounds like an enticing field of study, no matter it keeps children singing, it has a corollary to it. The corollary is that many students around the world who have been enticed to enroll or take up this course at different levels rapidly find that it is much more complicated and infinitely varied, rather what they have assumed. If the word literature presents obvious problems, the word children proves to be equally slippery. Perhaps What makes it slippery? Perhaps the positioning of this children's literature between adult writers and child readers is one obvious reason that has made the field somewhat a tangled jungle. We might, but irrespective of this, we want to keep celebrating the children's world and the world of childhood. It might keep the adult readers also singing, not only the children, even the adult readers might be kept singing throughout by means of reading and by means of research, but the song will be a mature song now. It will be different from what we have read in our childhood, books such as Alice's Adventures in the Wonderland. Even when we reread it, we might be applying a mature insight to look at these texts. So this opens up the Pandora's box, especially the relationship between communication and understanding between adults and children. So this is going to open up a lot of questions, and that I would like to call it as the Pandora's box. For instance, few questions I have already highlighted here. Do these texts really belong to children? I have already complicated the genre by saying it is written by children, written by adults for children, adult writers and child readers. That is creating a gulf, a divide. So this brings us to the primary question. Do these texts really belong to children? Because it's not written by them, though it belongs to them and it is for them, but written by adults, with the exception of young children's writers too. So if adult writers are producing and spawning stories for children, if they are spinning stories for children, these books, are they simply aimed at them? Are they simply targeted at the audience of children? If so, what kind of stories are they? Do the stories are of childhood, for childhood, or is it about childhood? If not, it is by children, what it is. So these are some of the star questions, and this is going to be the premise of my argument, through which I will be discussing two writers and their text, their contribution to the field of children's literature. Let us also explore the relation between children's books and childhood. So the Pandora's box is really coming into shape now. There is also an acronym. I leave it to the guesswork of the audience. Meanwhile, in the chat box, the audience can recall their children's world and the books with which they grew up, and they can start filling the chat box with this information too, so that we can travel together. What led us here? The adults, as adult readers, what has led us here? Is it a nostalgia or a wishful thinking that we want to reread the books we enjoyed during our childhood as a means of escape to that golden world, to that golden period? Are we trying to transform, or we are trying to put ourselves into that period by forgetting the woes of the present life? Is it a sheer escape from the stressful adult world? Are we trying to do that? If so, unfortunately, this escapism is a mistaken notion, because it neither leads us to the real present or to the real past. It takes us away from both the present and the past, and we will be nowhere. And another interesting factor is, it is more than what meets the eye. What we assume to be the subject matter of children's books, that it is very innocent, it will be simple, it is a pure delight, is not so. It is far from being simple. That is what I have put it as. It is more than what meets the eye, because the relationship between children's book and childhood is far from simple. In what way? Already the premise being established, adults write and children read. This means adults are exercising their power on children and they will be manipulating the children's world. So as a result, the books for children will not portray the world of childhood as it was or as it is, but how the adult writers wish to portray it to be. That's the first complexity. With certain sociological, political, and dramatic reasons, the adult writer tend to portray the childhood as they wish it to be. I have enough evidences in the books I have chosen to deliberate, and the evidences will be enumerated from those texts. Please mark this and note this point. This is the first point of discussion that we are beginning with. And this makes the relationship of adulthood and childhood precluding the existence of true children's book. As a result, a genuine 100% true children's book is also not possible. That's what scholars and critics in this field tend to agree with. And if I could remember one person, it is Jacqueline Rose. So Jacqueline Rose proposes that due to this gulf between adults and children, genuine 100% children-owned or children-operated books is an impossibility. So this takes us to the surprising difficulty of this field. Here, there is a sardonic observation by Ursula Le Guin. She says, quote unquote, "Sure, it's simple writing for kids. That's how it sounds, as if it's an enticing field into which we are transported and we are stepping into a sunny, carefree world. Yes, it sounds all simple, but see the next line. Sure, it's simple writing for kids, but how simple it is. It's as simple as bringing them up." With this, we can understand the complexity that is involved in this, and it is neither innocent nor simple in any reductive sense. We can't evaluate or judge children's literature in such a reductive sense. It means involving ourselves in a complex, active literary social system. This takes us further to the field of responsibility. Yes, when we deal with children's books, there is also a sense of responsibility attached to it. Because children are going to see this world delineated by the writers for them for the first time. And the impression, they have impressionable minds. And with that impressionable minds, they will be exposed to the new ideas. That responsibility is shouldered by the writers. What kind of world they have to show and how they have to portray that world to children, that lies on the writers, not only on writers, it also lies on parents and educators as well. Here again, there is a word of caution, because what may at first sight seem like trivial or ephemeral text are in fact more powerful indeed. In other words, what goes into children's mind through these books, when they are susceptible to new ideas, what goes into children's minds is our responsibility. It is the responsibility of the adult writers, of parents and educators, just as much as what goes into their stomachs. Rousseau puts it succinctly. He says, "We know nothing of childhood, and with our mistaken notions, the further we advance, the further we go astray. Because nature wants children to be children before they are men and women. But adults carry with us certain assumptions. When there is, if we look at the content of the children's books, if there is violence associated in the writing, such as exploitation or repression or hatred or some negative elements, if that is part of the content, we tend to assume that children won't see it as adults do. So they won't understand it, they won't see it. And we try to dismiss it by saying it's after all a children's book. That's how we make it more reductive in sense, but it's not so. Such assumptions are also our mistaken notions, the mistaken notions of adults, because children has their own ways of seeing, thinking, and feeling, which is peculiar to themselves. And nothing can be more foolish than to substitute our ways for them. I have split this quote of Rousseau, who records this observation about children's book, which befits the discussion that we are engaged in. Also, the underlying fact is that 99% of children's books are written by adults. And as a result, there is a huge responsibility that adult readers carry to initiate children into the world of books. And this goes with the premise that I'm trying to establish, that adult writers are writing for children. And as a result, we have to be very cautious when we tread into this domain. And it is a much more sensitive field. And there is also a divide between adult and children in this area, which we have to carefully investigate. So these are the points with which I would like to move on to the writer. The first writer I have taken to enumerate my discussion is Anit Blyton, who is a British children's writer, a writer who is famous for her books. If we take writers like Blyton and J.K. Rowling, how do they approach children? How do they write for children? They have a close contact, in fact, a close empathy to their intended audience. And with their intended audience, they establish a close empathy through their writing. I'm saying this and underscoring this point because when adult writers tend to give their ways of seeing and their impressions in the writings for children, then we cannot assume that it is free from manipulation. Their ideological stance and their ways of seeing the world might obviously go into it, and there might be some manipulative stance and some political underlying meanings, deep-rooted meanings in such writings. And Blyton's stories also have such meanings, but still she tries to exclude the adult readers and their judgments in a very cautious way. And she is creating a world for children by using a radical thought that my stories are meant only for children. It is meant only for the child readers, not for any adult readers. So she is not ready to take into account the adult judgment. I'm trying to bring this because if you do your research and if you explore on Anit Blyton, and there are a lot of critical backlashes on Anit Blyton's work, that she is critiqued for being racist, and she is also critiqued for being imperialist, and these are feminist, and these are some of the critical notions about Anit Blyton. But she has devoted a corpus of writing. Her contribution is immense, and she is still popular with children, and her contribution and her corpus is enormous. So in fact, it is a celebration of childhood, despite all these comments and the critical backlashes that I came across during my research on Blyton, which I would like to share. Now, let me move on. She creates an interaction between children and nature in her writings. And this makes her to be called as a modern Pied Piper. That is the radical thought with which she initiates her writings. She exclusively categorizes her books as school series or nature series and adventure series. This is how she categorizes, and she is creating a strong interaction between children and nature, between different age groups. She is categorizing her books, and adult readers are cautiously kept outside this circle, and she calls the adult judgments as not essential, and these stories are meant only for the children and they are the real audience. And she is trying to evade this gap between adulthood and childhood by creating this exclusion. So the celebration of the in-group, the children, she says it must be at the expense of the out-group. This is the comment made by David Rudd, a scholar who is exploring on Anit Blyton stories. Anit Blyton and the Mysteries of Her Stories is the writing published by Rudd. In these writings, he celebrates the work of Blyton, and he makes this radical statement and the radical stand taken by Blyton by saying it is the in-group. In the circle, children are in the center. She places the children in the center at the expense of the out-group, that is the periphery. She removes all the adults and their judgments and leaves them in the periphery. And as a result, when the piper leads the children, the piper cautiously and carefully leaves out the adults in the cold. For this deliberation, I have taken into account the stories meant for children below 10 years, 8 to 10 years. This is categorized as nature stories, also as adventure stories. This comes as part of Faraway Tree series, and 3 books are part of this series. They are written in 1930s and 40s. The first book is The Enchanted Wood. The second one is The Magic Faraway Tree. And the third one is The Folk of the Faraway Tree. The trope, the narrative trope of Blyton's writings, mainly it rests on relocation. She relocates the child protagonist and the children involved in the story from city to countryside. That is the first shift they encounter, and the children enter into a new world in the countryside. They get associated with nature. It brings them into a world with a sense of wonder and familiarity because they are from the city, and they are exposed to a lot of adventures. Some of the dialogues from this first book, The Enchanted Wood, establishes this relocation from city to country. So as soon as the children enter into the country, they are excited by the country and they make such remarks. What a fun to be in the country. And they want to explore the country to learn more about animals and birds. I shall pick as many flowers as I want to. Joe, Bessie, and Fanny are the 3 characters. I shall have a garden of my own. This is how children are initiated into the world of nature. And in an inclusive discourse about nature, Blyton presents nature in 2 ways. Yeah, she is making it as a site of fantastic adventure on the one hand, as well as it is a site for fruitful labor. When you want to have a garden of your own, you have to labor for it. So she brings nature as a site of fruitful labor, as well as she talks about, she allows and she tells that there is a scope to access nature, and there is the larger scope. It is a space actually that allows children to have fantastic adventures. But of these 2, fruitful labor and the space for fantastic adventure, though she includes both these in her discourse, given the privilege, Blyton obviously goes for nature's potential adventure. She considers nature as a space for potential adventure, so that attracts her the most. And this potential site for adventure is conditional. It is accessible only to children. That's how she makes the space so exclusive for children. And even this comes within a condition. When she says it is accessible only to children, she expects that the children can willingly suspend their disbelief. She expects the children to willingly suspend their disbelief to enter into this magical natural space which the enchanted wood represents. So that's the only condition for the children to enter. Why? Why such a condition is required? Why they have to enter by willingly suspending their disbelief? Because when children when they make a movement, when they get shifted from their city life, take London, for instance, because that is the geographical context of the writer. When children from London, the busy city, when they come to the countryside, some children tend to dismiss the life of the countryside as too dull and boring. And even the stories about fairies, the magic, the brownies, they don't interest them much and they dismiss them as old-fashioned. Even such characters we find in the second and the third book of this Faraway Tree stories. And Blyton deals with these children in such a way. She is recuperating these children by creating an interest. That is another narrative strategy in her writings. She makes the children, she love nature. She tries to make them nature lovers and also magic believers in one sense. And that's how she brings children closer to nature by dismissing their belief. She brings them closer to nature. That is one ecological lesson she conveys to children by making them more responsible for nature. And she also entices the children by the myth of the giving tree. She makes children learn how the tree can give them. It is the source. It has the potential for a lot of adventures and it can give them fruits. So this kind of relation she tries to set between children and nature. Yeah, and that brings a strong interaction between these two groups. And then another representation is she creates a divide. She creates a marker and she demarcates the magical natural space in the story by creating a narrow ditch. And this narrow ditch represents the adult-child divide. It lets only the children inside and it keeps the adults outside. And sometimes the adults can't even see this tree because this tree is visible only for the gaze of the children, this faraway tree. That is how the magical natural space becomes accessible only for children and it's open only to their gaze and it becomes one of their secret spaces of childhood and a space where they can have their growing also. They are really growing through this magic. They know their responsibilities and they are becoming eco-warriors towards the end. And another interesting factor which takes us to the next level is the flux. Yes, the faraway tree is a magical tree, but it is connected with more of changes. Every now and then it changes. And that is how the tree becomes an enigma, not only for children, but this is also the Blyton enigma. In a single tree, within a single tree, there is an arboreal jungle. We can call it as a myth, and it is also a reality on the other hand, because this magic tree on its top, atop this tree, above the branches of the tree, there are many different worlds. And the top reaches the faraway places which we don't understand. Here comes the connection by rereading Blyton. It invokes the modern readers to reread Blyton And it can be a retrospective reading. Since these books were written in 1930s and 40s, she might not have had this ecological understanding, but now we can use eco-criticism as a tool to explore the writings and to add more meanings to analyze these books, because the top branches of the trees talk about faraway places, and it keeps on changing. It differs every week, and it is not allowing everyone to climb onto its top, and we don't understand what is happening there exactly. And it also grows all kinds of different things, meaning different kinds of fruits at different times. And that it is in a single tree, but the single tree has all these worlds, different worlds in it. It stands for an interconnected ecosystem. It is a much layered and a complex tree that navigates the readers, and it also negotiates to open up for the challenges that today's eco-critics talk about. Some of the shifting magical lands that children are enticed are the rotting land. When they climb onto the tree to explore, like colonialist explorers, children are led into this space. First, the children are led into this tree by the native non-human inhabitants of the tree, who are known as denizens. This is how children enter into the new world of the tree. Then they learn from the denizens that the tree on its top has a beautiful world which keeps changing, but it is dangerous too. That is the caution with which the native denizens introduce the magical spaces that are part of the tree, about the arboreal jungle. But here, children being human, they have this colonialist exploration of the dangerous spaces. They are inspired to explore these, and that is related. This is another imperialist standpoint. And she gives the children this colonialist exploratory spirit. And with that true spirit, they climb on to the branches of the tree to reach the topmost part where these shifting magical lands are located. And these are the different lands that the children encounter. And sometimes they are bruised when they are climbing on to the rocking land, which is very slanted, and they slip down. And when they enter into the land of ice and snow, then there is a magic snowman, and this snowman extracts labor from them, asking the children to build a snow house for him. And then children are also exploiting the tree by taking whatever they want from the tree. They are taking more fruits from the tree, and they are trying to act in the way they want it to be, as they please. Sometimes even the children, as well as the denizens, they act in a very rash manner. They are involved in a hasty action. So such kind of colonialist implications and meanings are added to this land. And certain colonialist metaphors are evident in the novel. Expeditions, the words adventure, discovery, profit, exploitation of trees' resources, concretely add meaning to this interpretation. But it does not stop here. When the children exhibit their human tendency to do all these to the environment and to the different lands, sometimes they are getting lost. The tree tries to protect itself, because when stepping on and climbing on to the branches, to the topmost branches, sometimes the children gets lost and they could not retrace their route back to the tree from where they climbed on to the top. And they also get lost in the sense the tree is trying to stand together. All the trees come and stand together, and they create a block so that children cannot go farther. This way, the tree is not letting children to explore all the lands that are part of it, all the mysteries that are part of this tree. The unknowability and the mystery of nature is conveyed through this block, and the children get back safely because the formulaic happy ending of child's stories, children's books are adopted here with the help of the insiders of the tree who are living on the tree. They try to retrace their path and they come back safely. Nothing tragic happens, though they encounter a lot of problems during this exploration. Okay, what else it communicates? On the one hand, Blyton wanted children to be responsible with the resources. That's what she is trying to convey, which is very direct. She is blocking the trees. She is showing the trees as if blocking their path, not allowing the children to go farther to explore more so that they are forced to return. And they cannot take away everything. They cannot stay in the tree. They cannot spend the night in the tree. Though their birthdays are celebrated, they are given gifts in the tree world, but then they have to go back. They are reminded it is time for them to go back. They cannot stay in the tree in the night. This is how they are brought back to the reality as it happens in the folk tales. It begins with Once Upon a Time, where the children are transported to a story world. Then when the folk tale comes to an end, then the children are reminded of the reality. They are brought back to the reality by connecting them to the work at hand. Maybe tomorrow is your school, you have to go to bed, you have to do your homework. So this kind of phrases brings the stories to the ground reality. That's what happens here too. And then one another ecological lesson that she tries to give children with a didactic note. There is a sense of instruction and there is a sense of delight. These two are mixed together in the story. And she tells the children, you have to face the consequences if you act rashly against nature. Try to be more responsible when you deal with nature is the first lesson that she gives through the encounter of children with the magical lands and the problems that they face. And those problems are the consequences of their action, but nothing is tragic and they return safely and they are not allowed to stay in the land permanently. They are reconnected with the reality. Then one other meaning of the shifting lands at a metaphoric level is the different lands that keeps changing atop the tree represents environmental volatility as a consequence of global warming. Lawrence Buell puts it succinctly as the sense of environment. This is what the shifting lands, the series of shifting lands atop the tree tend to metaphorize, the sense of environment as a process rather than as a constant. So there is no one single land. The lands keep changing and it is beyond human control. Humans, it is so volatile in nature, though there are some responsive interactions, humans could not control it. It is beyond the control of human forces and human understanding and human thinking, even using scientific and technological tools. This is how environment and its volatility is used as a metaphor through these shifting lands. And then coming to another central motif in children's stories, animals, the presence of animals. If we take Beatrix Potter's Peter Rabbit or A.A. Milne's the Winnie the Pooh, if we take such classics, we find the central motif and the central character in children's stories will be animals. And here too, there is a speaking rabbit. And why animals are anthropomorphized, why they are given human traits. Most of the non-human, they are made into speaking objects. The non-human animals are given this humanizing trait. So here comes the question, when we give this humanizing trait to animals, are we refusing to come to terms with our own animality? That can be thought about. So this is the magic that Blyton Enigma is. This is the magic she has created through her writings, but it is a flux. It keeps changing. The tree keeps changing. Our environment keeps changing. Nothing is constant. It is a process. And this idea is beautifully conveyed through the magical natural space that's part of this faraway tree. In the retrospective rereading of Blyton, we can apply this eco-critical inquiry, because contemporary reading makes the books of Blyton an ecological parable in themselves. On the one hand, human interaction between children and nature. On the other hand, human, non-human interaction in the faraway tree also happens. There are brownies, there are non-human denizens living in the tree. Some are visitors, like speaking rabbit and other magpies and fairies are visitors to the tree, in the sense they don't claim any ownership to the tree. Forget about humans. Even the animals who live on the tree don't claim any ownership on the tree. That is another ecological lesson she gives us by saying animals are visitors to the tree. They move from one tree to another. This is how we see animals today, and we see birds. They sit on different branches of the trees. So why humans have to claim ownership? And the fruits also keep changing. There is an unfixity in the production of the tree also, because they don't want humans to take charge of the tree for agricultural production. As a result, the fruits keep changing in the tree. Unfixed productivity is another dimension of the tree. That is another magic of the tree. And some of the denizens of the tree, if we see, army of red goblins, these names, Moonface. When Madam introduced a series of names in the beginning, I was recalling these names. Nila, when she was thanking the chairpersons, Bulbul, Nila, it sounds very interesting. And those names also fits very well with the children's tales. Moonface, Slippery Slip, even the furniture are round. So the Moonface has two elements. On the one hand, it has the human element of face with certain features of humans. And on the other hand, it has the moon. It is a mixture of features. And Slippery Slip, it is like the slippery slip we use, children play in the parks. Then Silky the elf, Saucepan, Stamp-a-Lot, Woodpeckers. These are some of the characters we find. And the furnitures are round to accommodate that space in the tree. That also shows the adaptability of the living space with nature. They are not trying to conquer the nature by subduing nature for human necessities, whereas the houses and the Moonface, especially the house where Moonface resides in the tree, and the furniture that is kept for birthday parties are very curved furniture. Everything is round in shape, in the sense they adapt to the space, and the furniture and the living space are adapted to the space of the tree. And another important ecological parable and lesson that we can draw from here is there is a mode of resistance. Give and take interaction happens. That's what is conveyed through the myth of the giving tree. The tree gives, and it also takes back something from the children. They have to give toffee to use the slippery slip. If children want to play in the slippery slip, which is located within the tree, they are trying to take chocolates, and they are giving chocolates to Moonface to allow them to play. But sometimes they go without chocolates, but still they are allowed to play. So this kind of give and take, in a very simplistic terms, it begins. But towards the end, when the life of the tree is threatened because its root gets diseased, and the life of this single tree gets threatened, and that time the native non-human denizens of the tree, as well as the children who are visitors to the tree, Both of them try to treat. They use indigenous medicines to revive and recuperate the tree and its roots so that it is saved. There, the agency of children and their action as ecological warriors becomes a strong bonding and an interaction between children and nature. And one another rule of the tree is that what has to be given is determined by the tree and not by the humans. Humans cannot take anything and everything from this tree. That is why it is called as the oldest and the magical tree. What to be given is determined by the tree in its own terms. It has its control over itself. And overall, the tree text has an eco-ethical framework. That is, the contemporary reading for researchers can apply this framework. And research articles on this book is very limited because Anit Blyton was not given serious critical attention. Considering her as a lowbrow writer, she was not given serious attention. And as a result, the scholarly works are very limited on Anit Blyton, though she is a popular work. Somewhere I read she used to write 10,000 words a day. And she has created a corpus of children's works, and her contribution is immense. So there is a greater scope to work on her books. Even Beatrix Potter, who has contributed in the early 20th century, her works are also now taken up. These are some precedents. They are taken up for research. That is what I call rereading in retrospect. Some of the aspects of Beatrix Potter's books are revisioning feminism in her work. Girl characters and girlhood are studied in Beatrix Potter's work, but the nature stories and the school series stories of Blyton are applicable for ecological framework and ethical framework. So when it comes to ethics, human accountability to environment is emphasized. Initially, when the children were initiated into the world of nature, here, faraway tree, by extension, it represents nature itself. They are led into this world with a sense of curiosity, with wonder, sense of wonder, with a sense of adventure, scope and space for magical adventure, potential for adventure. With that curiosity, they were led into the world. Then they started loving, and along with love, they started respecting the rules because they cannot take back any fruits back to their home. They will be provided with fruits which they can enjoy and eat while they are in the tree. And they cannot spend their night in the tree. By evening, they have to leave. These are some of the rules which they do respect. And towards the end, we can see the collective responsibility of the children when they become the agency as eco-warriors to save the tree from its demise. As well as ecological crisis and the catastrophes. Environmental catastrophes are conveyed by the shifting magical lands. All in all, the book conveys a green lesson, and it talks about the reciprocal relation between nature and human. And through this, we get a sign of sustainable cohabitation with nature. Hope I have time. May I know? Excuse me.
Ma'am, we have reached 45 minutes. We can extend it for a few more minutes.
Okay.
You can continue.
I will take another 15 minutes. Because
Okay.
now I'm moving on to another writer. From Anit Blyton, I move on to another transnational writer who also shares the British Indian heritage. The contemporary writer, Salman Rushdie, we know him obviously as a post-colonial writer, but his contribution to children's literature is also coming in way. It has started in 1990, and in 2010, he is continuing with his children's works. That is his major contribution. By writing to his sons, in the name of writing to his sons, his contribution to this field of children's literature actually began. The two books are Harren and the Sea of Stories. This was the first book. These are treated as minor works. We are familiar with Midnight's Children, but the real children's books of Salman Rushdie came in 1990. It is titled Harren and the Sea of Stories. It was written to his 11-year-old son, Zafar. And the sequel appeared years later, titled Luca and the Fire, published in 2010. And this was written to his younger son, Milan. Then he was 12-year-old. Here, let me ask the esteemed audience to remember the manipulation. When adult writers tend to write for children, do they have an agenda for themselves? Are they trying to incorporate their ideological stance? What is right and wrong? What is good and bad? Are they trying to politicize the content? Yes. That's why I have kept that as my premise. Salman Rushdie's writings are not free from controversies and political agencies. And this book is a best example for it, though it falls under the category of children's literature up to the age group roughly from 11 to 16 can enjoy this book, whereas Blyton's book, which I have chosen to deliberate today, are from 7 to 10. Now I am taking the age group to the next level. To introduce this book, Harren and the Sea of Stories, called as HSS, it represents Rushdie and his sons. The characters in the story, there is a father storyteller, and this father storyteller and his son Harren represent the writer and his son. It is an allegorical tale. Obviously, there is a political allegory to it. And through this political allegory, the tumultuous context of this book gets unfolded. What is the tumultuous context in which it came to be written in 1990? Let us first know that. Remember, Salman Rushdie's novel Satanic Verses was written in 1988, and that controversial novel invited fatwa. On 14th February 1989, fatwa was issued by the Iran supreme leader and the spiritual head, Khomeini. So he issued this fatwa on Rushdie's head due to his disrespect for Islam. And this resulted in subsequent exile. This is the tumultuous context in which Rushdie came up with this work, and he used this as an allegorical tale to express his voice. When I say fatwa, he is gagged. There is a censorship on his book. It has to be banned, and it was banned in India. And under this censorship and under this imposed silence, how a writer, a storyteller, a master storyteller will suffocate, what will happen to his freedom of expression, his artistic expression, his freedom of speech, everything is in question. He could not remain in passivity and submission. Rather, he creates a magic world of stories. And within this magic world of stories, he communicates his concern. Therefore, Rushdie is represented through a father storyteller. Rushdie is the father figure in literal sense in reality, because he writes a story. He writes this book to his son. So the father-son relation is established here. And that father-son characters in the fictive world are created. There is a father storyteller. His name is in close anagram to Rushdie, called as Rashid. Then son Zafar is represented by Haron, who is 11-year-old. The exploits of this child protagonist to save the father and to retrieve to restore the lost voice of the father and the loss of the gift of gab. The father storyteller in the novel also loses his gift of storytelling. All of a sudden, the stories get blocked. Whenever the son was curious to know the source of stories of his father, the father simply says, glug, glug, glug. It's like the sound of the water. Story water, he says. I drink story water, and I drink hot story water, and the steam of the water works inside me and it produces stories. It is like an act of juggling. He combines a lot of stories, the ending and the beginning, and he weaves a new story like a liquid tapestry. If we observe the title from this hint, Harren and the Sea of Stories, that itself alludes to two narrative cycles. Harren here stands for the Arabian Nights, the West Asian culture and the Arabian Nights. Harren al-Rashid, that is also the name of the Caliph in the city of Baghdad. And that name is split into the names of the two characters, the child hero known as Harren and the father storyteller known as Rashid, Harren al-Rashid. And if we take the Sea of Stories, that narrative cycle comes from Kathasarit Sagar, which was written in Sanskrit, and it consists of 18 books and 124 sections, each divided into tarangas, into waves. That becomes the sea here. The ocean becomes the metaphoric sea of stories here. The sequel, Luca and the Fire of Life. Sorry, I have missed one part of the title, Fire of Life. So Fire of Life also deals with the mythology of gods and goddesses, Indian, Greek, Rome. It brings the world mythologies into context. And then the sibling, Harren, Luca is the sibling of Harren. That's how the sequel is created. They are in quest. And these heroes are trying to restore the father's loss. One is trying to restore the life of the father. The first book is trying to restore the loss of voice. This loss of voice is experienced by Rushdie himself at a literal level. What appears to be fictional also became literal in Rushdie's life, and that becomes the meeting point in this story. And he is trying to weave a stream of stories, and he finds children's books as a safe space to do it. That doesn't mean children's books act as a subterfuge. It's not so. But in the tumultuous context, when fatwa was issued over his head, and he has to literally move from one country to another country to save himself, that time, this book was written for his son. And that is an expression of the adult writer's context. Though it is written for children, what motivates the writer to write it is his own context. That's why I have made my premise as the adult-child divide. And what is the agenda of the adult writer when they write books for children? Is there an agenda, and is it manipulative? Yes, to some extent it is. The first half of the story itself begins on a sad note. It opens in a city, Alif Bay. And this city, Alif Bay, is a sad city. In its saddest of sadness, the city has forgotten its name. And in this city, we find Harren, who had a once happy family. In the sense, now they are not happy. His mother's songs and his father's stories got lost. And that brings sorrow to the family and also separation to the family, because mother abandons the family and leaves because the father is not in touch with the harsh ground realities being a storyteller. So with this sadness and with this split in the family on the personal level, the political is introduced. There is an election campaign. And in that election campaign, the leaders don't have a credibility for themselves among the people of the city. So they engage this storyteller in their election campaign to attract the audience. And this takes the father and the son to the valley of K. Our next speaker is going to talk about Kashmir. He is going to contextualize his talk in Kashmir. Maybe this is a prelude to it. So the characters move to Valley of K. That is the origin of Rushdie. Valley of K here refers to Kashmir, but he uses it with a hint as K, and the famous Dal Lake of Kashmir becomes Dal Lake. And Mr. Bhutto is the one who takes. He is the politician, political leader who engages the father figure in this election campaign. So this is how the story is led into a fantasy world, into a fairy world. In a Pinocchio fashion, the child hero becomes the savior of his father's lost gift. The friends of his father, the fans call him Ocean of Notions, whereas the rivals call him the Shah of Blanc when they were in the city of Alif Bay, which is a sad city in itself. From this part, from this initial part, the narrative moves to the adventurous fairy tale world. And this fairy tale world and the fantasy world opens up now to restore the loss. Here, the writer is including the realm of science fiction. He blends the realm of science fiction with the fantasy by creating the movement, a second moon, and he talks about how the movement of the second moon is arrested. And this second moon is named Kahani. And within this Kahani, we are debating whether in moon there is water or not. Within this Kahani, there is an ocean. It is the ocean of the stream of stories. And what is this P2C2E? A process too complicated to explain. That stream of stories, how it works, how it functions. There is a process behind it, and that process is too complicated to explain because the source of the stories are from here. The wellspring of the story and the source of story lies beneath the ocean bed, which is plugged. Here comes the two factions of two feudal groups. One is Gup. The moon itself is divided in two halves. One side of the moon is the dark side, and the dark side is occupied by Chup. It is their city, Chup, silence. And this Chup stands as a metaphor for the gag order and how silence was imposed for Rushdie. That is the dark side where all the negative forces and the negative characters are there, and that is ruled by the arch villain Khatam Shud, and who stands for the Iranian leader Khomeini. Then the land of Gup, the other side of the moon, is bright. It is a bright side bubbling with voices, whereas the Chup is the dark side filled with silence. This is how the moon is divided, meaning the movement of the moon, the movement of this, the lunar movement of this planet is completely controlled using instrumentation center, where we find elements of science fiction. And there are mechanical birds with a bite-a-light torch they carry in their mouth, which illuminate their path. And finally, there is a combat between the science fiction world and the Wishwater magic potion. And finally, the Wishwater magic potion wins, and the science fiction world is destroyed. But coming to the stories, what alludes here is how the stories are born from this ocean. Harren looked into the water as soon as he entered into this ocean with the help of a magic fairy, Yif, a water genie. He saw that it was made up of 1,001 different currents. That is alluded in the title Sea of Stories, the Tarangas, the waves, the different colors with which it weaves in and out, like a liquid tapestry, sea of streams of stories. That's what yes, yes, yes stands for. And all the stories that have ever been told, that is the old stories, are getting mixed with the new stories. And out of this combination, new stories are born. And the stories which are about to be born, about to be told in future, are also getting manufactured within this ocean. So that unlike a library of books, this ocean of the streams of story was much more than a storeroom of yarns. It was not dead, but the story room was alive. This is the picturesque imagination. You can find how the ocean is getting polluted because the dark side of the moon, the Kahani occupied by the Chups, it has the arch villain with diabolical intention to destroy the stories. He is poisoning the ocean of the stories, and the wellspring of the source of the stories is being plugged by him, and that has blocked the storyteller's narrative. And for that remedy, to find the source and to get the remedy for the block, Harren, the child hero, and the exploits of him takes him to this fantasy world, to the land of Kahani, which is the fabulous land. We can find how the poison factory is emitting the black smoke, and the city of Alif Bay is also hung with smoke, black smoke like that of bad news. And here comes the play of opposites. There is a battle in which Harren gets inadvertently involved, and this battle between Gup and Chup results in victory. So at different layers, the allegory works. On the one hand, it is a political allegory. On the other hand, there is a romantic allegory because there is Prince Bolo, Princess Batshit, and there is a war that is going to happen. Chatterjee is the king of the land of Gup. So this way, there is a romantic allegory. On the other hand, there are ecological concerns also, and the political allegory also takes place, which is very evident. Will it be interesting for children? Now comes the question, fatwa, censorship, can they understand? Will it be entertaining for the children? That's why the magical elements are included in the story. The fabulous land of Kahani is created, which is populated by two groups. And these two groups, one is light and one is dark. Actually, the Guppies, their entire frame of society is filled with light, and they are more towards talk. They celebrate talk and they celebrate speech and stories, whereas the Chupwalas are very silent. As a result, there is no feeling of friendship, there is secrecy, and there is suspicion among them. So these kind of magical elements are giving a message to children. Freedom of speech and artistic expression are more important. That adds lively feeling and sensibility to our world and to our life. This is what Rushdie tries to convey by making these magical elements, by bringing all these magical elements into the stories. And he enlivens the narrative further through the semantic juggling in characters' names, which is a play, word game and a word play, and using verbal dexterity, because that is the language is the primacy function. Primarily, that is the function of storytelling, which he deals with in giving names to the characters. It shows the sheer inventiveness with which the characters are named. Guppies are inhabited by Yif, the water genie, but then the driver, Hupu, it is a mechanical bird with a brain box with memory cell and command modules. And there is an interesting character known as Plenty More Fish, and this Plenty More Fish stands as a metaphor for streams of stories and the creation of stories. Thousand waves, how they are getting interconnected. That is metaphorized through Plenty More Fish. Plenty more fish, plenty. It has many mouths. It has multiple mouths through which it takes the water. When it takes the water, it is not the water, but it takes all the stories which are part of this ocean stream. And when it spews the water out, it has worked in the innards. The magic working of the tails happened in the innards of the fish, that when it spews the water, they all get connected, and different stories and the new stories emerge from the world constantly. And Chupwalas, under the dreaded leader of Katam Shud, and they construct a wall to keep the division permanent. Here we cannot apply the colonialist metaphor that one trying to dominate the other, though there is a play of opposites between dark and light. There is a wall, and this wall is trying to create a permanent division. Finally, after the war, this wall gets demolished and the movement of the planet also gets restored. And through this, Rushdie tries to talk about cultural pluralism over purism. He highlights cultural pluralism, celebrate the differences, appreciate the differences, and celebrate uniqueness also. So that is what he wanted. He wanted to celebrate pluralism, cultural pluralism. So don't create a wall by making separatism. He is against separatism, and cultural purism is separatism, whereas cultural pluralism is celebrated through this division of the feuding parties, the war, and the final demolition of everything. Actually, it is didactic. Good wins over evil. That is how the ending is. And another interesting factor is the textuality of the narrative. And that also adds a magical element, and it entices the interest of the children. General Kitab, he is the leader, Kitab. And this Kitab has soldiers. The soldiers are called pages. And when they organize themselves in lines, they are in chapters and volumes. They wear lamination as their dress. And when the infantry meets at the command of General Kitab, there is a lot of rustling of pages when the soldiers assemble until order is restored by pagination and collation. So these are some inventive details that infuses the imagination of children. And another distinctness between these two worlds is Gup is a warm place and Chup is freezing cold. One is light and dark. And Guppies love the ocean, and Chupwalas try to poison the water and the stories. They want to destroy the story. That's their ultimate aim. Guppies love stories and speech, whereas Chupwalas seem to hate it very strongly. This antithesis between art and power also brings another interesting factor, and it connects to the ecological concerns. Evidently, it shows the struggle between life and death, clean air, pure water on the one hand, and polluted landscape and acid sea on the other, which are contemporary concerns. And then the Chupwalas are infecting the live ocean with the virus of anti-stories, which is manufactured in the poison factory located in a black ship, which I have shown figuratively in the previous slide. And ultimately, the ecological concern is, through all these magical elements, the ecological concern is also conveyed to the children, that it links the restoration of creativity. By means of restoring the creativity of the father, there is also a need to save the ocean from pollutants. So this is how the ecological concerns are also taken care of, along with the science fiction realm into which they enter. Finally, the magic potion, the wish water does magic. It makes a wonderful result compared to the science fiction strategies and the technology. The instrumentation center that is in the land of Chup, which controls the movement of the moon, the lunar movement of the moon, so that the light remains permanently on one side and the darkness remains permanently on the other side. The movement is arrested for a while. And this has been resolved not by using technology, but by using the Wishwater fantasy. And that determines and connects with the child readers about the power of magic and the power of the fantasy world. The children are made to believe. But the underlying motive of the text is what is happening in the second moon, the Kahani. And also it is an antithesis. It is a struggle between art and power. On the one hand, there is a celebration of imagination, and on the other hand, there are also those who are threatened by the energies of imagination and they want to silence the world of imagination and creativity. Finally, there is a synthesis of three different domains. One is the fabular domain, the fabulous land of Kahani itself, where all the magical adventures takes place, both good and bad. And then there is the political meaning and the political allegory embedded in it. And there is also a personal story. Let us not forget how it begins. Yes, I'm towards the end, ma'am. The non-realist mode of narration.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you, ma'am. Just a
The
reminder.
Yeah, thank you. The personal is the sad story of the family, where the mother has abandoned the family, and Harren carries a sadness within, that is of broken parents, broken marriage. That is too heavy a sadness he carries. And non-realist mode of narration is adopted, for which Salman Rushdie is well known for his magic realist technique in fiction. And for children, it is not a surprise. They are never surprised by miracles, by the incredulity of metamorphosis. So children and child readers enjoy this mode of narration most naturally when he blends reality with fantasy. And this parable of art and its enemies, it brings the art and its enemies together through this parable to show allegorically the threat of censorship that is experienced by what kind of menace it has created. That was experienced by Rushdie during the production of this work, and that became the context for this work. So stories become a metaphor in this novel for creativity. That's why the feuding parties and their duel is between speech and silence, between openness and secrecy, wherein the importance of free speech and the freedom in literature, the freedom of creative expression and artistic expression is emphasized. More than the fun talk, it is also freedom talk that is the underlying note of this book. Let me end with the last part. The words highlighted in red are the dedicatory verse. These are the verses dedicated by Rushdie to his son, to whom this book is written for. He says, by saying it is an acrostic verse, by saying all our dream worlds may come true, he determines the reality of the magic and the fantasy world which entertains children more. He wants to connect with the child readers through this world. So he says our dream worlds may come true. He wants to keep it as true, as a true world. And then fairy lands are fearsome too. He is also warning them that fairy lands are fearsome too, as I wander far from view. That is his plight. He is far away from his family due to fatwa, and he is moving to faraway lands, and those lands might be fearsome, and he is making his children experience the fearsome of the fairy lands, which is experienced by him literally. And what is his earnest request for his children? Read and bring me home to you. I am not with you, but by reading my book, which is written for you, you keep me with you. At the personal level, this is how he connects himself. So there is the merging of father-son relation on the one hand, and on the other hand, it is a political allegory where he is against censorship and the erasure. Then at the ethical level, he connects himself to the world by saying, evil is not permanent, evil cannot win. The final insubstantiality of evil is reiterated by him finally. So this verse connects the metaphoric and the magical hero in the novel with the real hero, that is Harren. Magical hero Harren and a real hero Zafar. It connects both. These lines are interesting, with which I will wrap up. About the field of children's literature, this genre, where is it exactly? Halfway up the stairs isn't up, and it isn't down. It isn't in the nursery. It isn't in the town. All sorts of funny thoughts run round my head. It isn't really anywhere. It's somewhere else instead. That is the state of children's literature today. And we can take it further because it presets what has to be done socially and as a cultural trait with inclusion and diversity. The field is a promising and an enticing field, not only for children to enjoy it as a matter of pure and private delight, but for adult readers to explore more on children's books. With this, I mark the celebration of this conference on children's literature, and I hope there is a much more celebration that awaits us in the next keynote talk. As every member of the audience, I'm also eager to listen to the specialist viewpoints of the distinguished fellow speaker and valedictory speaker, and the biggest celebration of today's event awaits at the end. Thank you and wish you all the best.
Thank you, ma'am. I'm sure your academic perspective on children's literature with interesting deliberations on Anit Blyton and Salman Rushdie will have an impact on our outlook of life. And we're also definitely looking forward to have one session with you on folk tales of Bhutan. Thank you, ma'am. Now, I invite Dr. Anto Thomas, Associate Professor and Head, Department of English, St. Thomas College, Thrissur, Kerala, to deliver the keynote address.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. Am I audible, ma'am? I just want
Yes, sir, you are.
Okay, thank you, thank you. Now, first of all, I would like to thank the chairperson, the secretary, and the principal, as well as the head of the department and the conference organizer for inviting me to this presentation, online though. I would also like to record a word of appreciation, a positive praise, and offer a bouquet of congratulations to PSGR Krishnamal College for Women at Coimbatore for securing enviable ranks among the academic institutions in India.
Thank you so much, sir.
I congratulate you for your excellent grade at the NAC accreditation, A++ grade, which every college actually dreams on, and for a more excellent recognition from NIRF being placed as the 6th level of recognition as the 6th college in India. I would like to thank Dr. Sushil, the head of the department, and Dr. Mathangi, the conference organizer, for making this conference on recent trends in children's literature a reality. I congratulate you for the wonderful organization of this function. It's indeed a proud moment for you, I'm sure, and I would like to share in your happiness as well. And Dr. Mathanki, I'm glad that you have chosen the 11th of October as the day for this webinar. 11th October is United Nations International Day of Girls. It's the day of the girl childhood. Let us, on this occasion, reaffirm the pledge to promote the progress of the girls and safeguard their rights through this international virtual seminar. I have often been to PSTR Krishnamal College for Women. And whenever I come there, it's like visiting my elder sister's house. I feel very much at home at PSTRK. I'm sure that an institution like PSTR Krishnamal College, which caters to the liberty, the fraternity, and the equality of girls, is the ideal world for every Indian to aim for. Let's hope that the whole of India would become like a campus of PSTR Krishnamal College. With these words of introduction, I would like to continue from where the inaugurator of the conference, Dr. Chitra, stopped it. I'm glad that Dr. Chitra has recommended to you certain perspectives and viewpoints to read and to research in children's literature, which includes an eco-critical perspective, as well as, let's say, to view everything from the point of view of Rushdie's magic realism and the fantastic. And children's literature is a possibility where everything is accommodated. Eclectic viewpoints are possible. Before I proceed with my talk, since the topic of the virtual seminar is recent trends in children's literature, I feel that as we, a bunch of speakers, the inaugurator, the keynote speaker, and the valedictory speaker, we present only certain points of view. As I already mentioned, Dr. Chitra's point of view of the ecological and the magic realistic point of view. I'll be speaking on reviving nationalism in Kashmir, a rather controversial topic. And Dr. Kimberly Reynolds, the professor of children's literature at Newcastle University, will be talking on the sexual themes in children's literature. Another, let's say, a precarious topic. But I would suggest to the audience who may be interested in knowing more recent developments in children's literature, let me mention 3 imminent international conferences. Most of them, it's possible to attend online thanks to the pandemic. First of all, the next week, if you are interested, from 19th October to 29th October, there is the 25th Biennial Congress of the International Research Society for Children's Literature, IRSCL. It's the 25th Biennial Congress, which means It's exactly 50 years after the founding of the International Research Society for Children's Literature. This year's biennial Congress, the 25th Congress, is hosted by Santiago University in Chile, South America. Unfortunately, it's an online event. And this particular conference of IRSCL is on aesthetic and pedagogic engagements in children's literature. And this conference on aesthetic and pedagogic engagement in children's literature is going to answer another pertinent question in children's literature. Who is the ideal child? Is it the child that writes and reads? So elevating the child from our common viewpoints of the child being adult in the making to a more engaging position and agency given to the child as the readers as well as the makers of children's literature in their own right. It is a more recent trend that would be discussed in this most prominent international conference of children's literature, where normally there would be participants from more than 50 countries or so, and usually around 300 to or so more participants actually taking place. It's one of the largest international children's literature conference. So those who are interested in children's literature, especially research scholars, please note this particular conference, the 25th IRSCL Biennial Congress. The second event that I would like to bring to the notice of the stakeholders who are interested in children's literature is the Child and the Book Conference, the 16th Child and the Book Conference. I participated online in the 15th Child and the Book Conference. It was scheduled during the first onslaught of the pandemic. I had booked for it, but I couldn't go because of the pandemic. But later on, it was converted into an online program. It was supposed to be in Berlin. But 16th Child and the Book Conference will be in Malta. They are hosted by the University of Malta from 26th to 28th May 2022. And the topic of this conference is the role of child as citizen, constructing childhood through agency and activism. The role of the child as a citizen, constructing childhood through agency and activism. Another important recent trend that would be discussed by more than 100 participants to the conference, the Child and the Book Conference. The third conference that I would like to bring to your notice is Children's Literature Association of America, CHLA 2022 conference, international conference. It will be in Atlanta in the state of Georgia from the 2nd of June to the 4th of June 2022. The theme of the 2022 CHLA conference is City in a Forest. So we'll find nature and ecology becomes the trend once again in this international conference. So I have just suggested three venues for those who are interested. This is just an on the spur of the moment thought that I thought I should share with you instead of, let's say, speaking on my topic. I hope it's beneficial. The IRSCL, the Child and the Book, and the Children's Literature Association of America, CHLA, the three conferences which would definitely initiate you to more relevant recent trends in children's literature. Now, moving on to my topic. Reviving nationalism, Kashmir in Indian English children's literature. Nationalism has been a very hot sale topic ever since Anderson published his Imagined Communities, his study on nationalism. Recently, just a few months ago, in 2021, one of the most serious academic publishers, Routledge, in their contemporary South Asia series, published a book. The name of the book is Nationalism in India, Texts and Context. I think the print version would be available only next year. It's the online version that is available now. Nationalism in India, Text and Context. It's edited by Debajyoti Biswas and John Charles Roy. This book, Nationalism in India, Texts and Context, begins with the following observation. Let me quote from the book. Every time when the tide of nationalism is presumed to have ebbed out, it rises again with fresh vigor like a phoenix. Every time when the tide of nationalism is presumed to have ebbed out, it rises again with fresh vigor like a phoenix. I would ask you to note this quotation because I would like to present my argument with this quotation in point of view. While perusing through this book, you will notice that one of the chapters, one of the articles that has been edited as a chapter into this book is on children's literature. And the chapter is Nationalism through the Glorification of Pre-Colonial Indian Past in the work of Chanda Mama, the comic book Chanda Mama. It's an article by Mr. Aloysius Sebastian, an assistant professor from Christ University Bank. Why do I particularly mention this work, which has apparently no connection with my topic? This is just to pinpoint that great academic publishers like Routledge do not consider children's literature as, let's say, a trivial subject. They do consider it as a befitting topic for serious adult consideration. And so, scholars of children's literature need not entertain the inferiority complex again and again, that they are marginalized, that their topic is not suitable for serious adult study. No. If it can be included, it can be in Routledge, it can be included everywhere. And so let me begin my topic Reviving Nationalism, where I'm going to consider Indian English children's literature in Kashmir. I consider only authors who are native Indian, domestic Indian authors. And so just precisely because of this reason, I have eliminated, let's say, authors like Salman Rushdie and so on, because they are not domestic Indians who live in India. I would like to promote native Indian children's literature. That is my focus while speaking on this topic today. Yeah. When we speak on nationalism, and in our topic, nationalism in Kashmir, how it becomes revived, we need to, first of all, look at the word nation. I think it's an interesting exercise to etymologically consider the word nation. If you look at the Oxford Dictionary, it traces the origin of the word into the Latin root word nasi, which means to be born. The West have already taken it for granted that the sense of nation, nationhood, national consciousness, all these have originated from the West. For example, Julia Kristeva would consider nation to be a term coined in the French language for the first time. Another viewpoint is presented by Eric Hobson in his book, Nations and Nationalism since 1780. In this book, Eric Hobson states that prior to the last decades of the 19th century, the word in Spanish did not mean the same meaning that we give to it. It meant, it included, the term included to incorporate foreigners as well. It's only later on in the second decade of the 20th century that we know that the word came to mean the collectivity of persons who are the same ethnic origin, people who speak the same language, people who possess the same tradition, common tradition. But Adrian Hastings, an English critic who has written the work, The Construction of Nationhood, Ethnicity, Religion and Nationalism, disagrees with Hobson's view that of tracing for the meaning of nationalism or from the Spanish viewpoint. Adrian Hastings says that Spanish language is not the ideal language to trace the meaning of the word nationalism, because he has his own argument that the Spanish linguistic community originally had a tradition of being a subjugated people and a race, and their language is not a typical specimen for tracing the etymology of the word. Instead, Adrian Hastings would like to refer to Dr. Johnson's dictionary of 1755, where we find Dr. Johnson quotes Sir Walter Raleigh to define the nation, to quote, as a people distinguished from another people, generally by their language, origin, or government. So in these three examples, we do realize that the sense of the modern nation is ascribed a Eurocentric connotation. And this Eurocentric connotation is limited to the cultural and political notion of sovereignty, people, and territory that the Eurocentric viewpoints promulgate. Do we have another viewpoint? Here, I would like to rely on the recently published book, Nations in India, Texts and Context, where one of the editors, Debajyoti Biswas, argues that the concept of nation in many of the Indian languages can be predated to an earlier past than what the Europeans understand as nation. Here, Debajyoti Biswas refers to the famous work of Shashi Tharoor, Why I Am a Hindu, and where we will find that the concept of a Rashtra, the country, appears several times in Rigveda, a 3,500-year-old Vedic text, and also in the Upanishads. So the argument of Debajyoti Biswas is that the idea of a cultural and religious unity, which is so central to the concept of European nationalism, is an idea that was present in India since the ancient times. Now, at the same time, we need to know that there is nothing called a monolithic Hindu religion. In fact, the sense of such a term was brought in by the British. Unlike the religions that consider Abraham as their father, Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, the religions which believe in a particular creator and having a definite way of worship and practicing. Hinduism is a plurality of practice. However, we say that Sri Shankaracharya brought in the unification. We will find that it's the plurality of practice that dominates. But critics like Shashi Tharoor and Debajyoti Biswas, they identify 4 important traits that are particularly important to bring in the concept of a cultural unity of India, a cultural unity that is even stronger than the concept of a political unity, because India was politically divided during the history, ruled over by kings and emperors and the colonial rulers. But in matter of culture and religion, there was a confluence of thought, and this confluence of thought was brought about by 4 important principles. First, Sanskritization, which was there as a backdrop, but then we will find that the establishment of Shakti Pidha, the seat of female deity, the Bhakti movement, the Kumbh Mela, and the Sanskritization, as I mentioned before. They are the four important elements that hold together the concept of a cultural unity of the nation. The idea of imagined community, the idea floated by Benedict Anderson, it can be seen as a very cogent idea in the formation of a nation based on cultural unity. But since ancient times, various social reformers and religious preachers, in one way or the other, continued creating cultural bridges across India. However, with the Muslim invasion of India, there emerged an interlude of a periodic cultural dominance, a period of confluence and mutation. The early invasion of India started with genocide and plunder, looting and destruction. But as many historians argue, like eminent historian Romila Thapar, that Hindus were not persecuted under the rule of Muslims. And far from being victimized, Hindu culture flourished along with other cultures in these centuries of Islamic rule. The cultural landscape during Akbar's rule was forging a new idea of nation politically through the matrimonial alliances and promotion of religion of all faiths that Akbar advocated. Actually, the nationalistic sentiment in India was to a certain extent kindled by colonial oppression and economic exploitation of the natives. A cultural revival that was actually on stage along with the independence struggle. This reclaiming of cultural past as a national culture gradually became problematic because with the growth of nationalistic sentiments and a revival of the past culture, there was also a proportionate communal disharmony between the two major communities living in British India, the Hindus and the Muslims. This discord was steered by the colonial historiography. Although the British had enslaved all Indians irrespective of their religious affiliation, and all communities were ought to resist the British in a collective effort, nevertheless, a certain anti-Muslim rhetoric has been fanned by the colonial historiographers and British officers from the very beginning of these national struggles for freedom. The nationalist sentiment, therefore, naturally looked back, not towards the medieval India, which is portrayed as dark, declining, traumatic under the Mughal tyranny, but to the golden, ancient Hindu past. This gave scope to Hindu nationalist historiographers to fall back on a glorious classical past. There is an emerging effort to historicize Kashmir and consecutively relocating the region to its earlier Hindu identity. It is in the backdrop of this argument that I would like to consider the topic of our presentation today on reviving nationalism in the context of a Kashmiri Indian English children's literature. And the first book that I would like to consider is Devika Rangachari's historical fiction for young adults, Queen of Ice, published in 2014. Queen of Ice is a significant work in Indian English children's literature. Not just because Queen of Ice appears in the White Raven's list of recommended books. I do not know whether you know about the White Raven's list of books. White Raven's to be included in the White Raven's list. It's an award. It's a recognition. It's a recognition instituted by the International Youth Library in Munich, Germany. I had been a recipient of the International Youth Library Fellowship for Children's Literature Studies in 2019. For your knowledge, every year, the International Youth Library in Munich announces a competition and selects a couple of international scholars and funds them to conduct their research in the International Youth Library. The International Youth Library is a place you should visit if you get an opportunity. It's in a panoramic location, a site where one can study sitting inside a historic medieval castle and experience the peace and tranquility of the most environmentally friendly European city, Munich. I would exhort you to apply for this international fellowship. It's given for a period of 3 months, but you will get sufficient time to get into this network of International Youth Library and establish contacts for a lifetime. Now, returning to our topic, Queen of Ice, the novel, unravels the story of a woman, Dida, a ruthless queen of Kashmir in the 10th century AD. She who ruled over for nearly 50 years. It is an exhilarating story of a strong woman from the past history. After the death of her husband, Kshemendra, the king of Kashmir, she takes over charge as the regent to her minor son, Abhimanyu. She quells the rebellion after the death of her husband and orchestrates a series of conquests. Later on, after the untimely death of her son and grandsons, she becomes the monarch. The novel is set in the backdrop of the snow-clad Kashmir. And Dida's tale throws light on how a woman, she is a physically handicapped woman, how such a woman overcomes her deformity, making no compromise on living courageously despite her disabilities. Queen Dida is the epitome of the modern woman, a woman bursting with energy and power, unmoved by the oppressions and gender stereotypes. But today, I do not consider the novel for all these accolades the novel receives to portray a single courageous woman with whom the 21st century girl child reader can identify. I would like to deviate from this stock appreciation of the novel to consider how the novel enables the young readers to ponder over patriotic affiliations, and thus I would like to turn on the keys of cultural nationalism, which is evident in the novel. I fear the emerging academic interest in historicizing Kashmir and a fascination in Indian English children's literature to portray heroic Hindu characters to identify with as a developing trend in Indian cultural nationalism. Unifies attempts to demarcate a specific Indian identity for Kashmir. Kashmiriness is here integrated into the wider Hindu cultural realm. Kashmir as a place, as a space, has been until now theorized, and the construction of Kashmir's identity is to be critically viewed in the context of the suspension of Article 370 in the Indian Constitution in August 2019, a provision that had guaranteed special rights to Kashmir. In the context of a Queen of Ice, contemporary imagination of Kashmir remains deeply informed by the past, and it is taking us to the representation of Kashmir in Kalhana's Rajatarangini, a 12th century masterpiece in classical Sanskrit. The author Kalhana represents Kashmir as the center of Indian polity, the wellspring of Sanskrit learning. And he presents Kashmir as a geographical, climatic, and ecological space that denotes patriotism. Whereas the relationship between Kashmir's physical specificity and its cultural history demands careful study and contextualization of this point. Kashmir that the novel Queen of Ice represents is pre-modern Kashmir. And the implication is to the child reader, a pre-Islamic Kashmir. The novel traces the contours of this pre-modern, pre-Islamic identity. What matters is not just a picture of Kashmir as a historically conditioned situation, but rather an attempt to represent a political and ideological declaration of belongingness. The novel is less concerned with a positivistic history of how things actually were, but it is rather an attempt to recovering Kashmir as an ideological construct. Moving from the Queen of Ice, I take another book for consideration, and it is Smriti Kaul's book, just published in 2020, Tales from Kashmir, children's book. It's an attempt to pin down Kashmir to its perennial Hindu identity. The book contains 5 short tales which rekindle Hindu culture and tradition in Kashmir. Here we will find the recent academic interest in constructing Kashmir in its historical past resonates with the ideas on nationalism as a political ideology. And this context proves the critic John Donne's observation on nationalism, which he promulgated in the book Western Political Theory in the Face of the Future, published in 1979. John Donne observes nationalism as the politics of egoistic self-preservation. Nationalism as the politics of egoistic self-preservation. In fact, nationalism takes in a myriad variety of forms, as it does incorporate a wide range of psychological, cultural, and political phenomena. National identity is inseparable from the issue of cultural identity of a people. And the young reader's mind constructs images of a Hindu Kashmir, drawing in a cultural continuity in forming an imagined nation in the historical context. Then we may say books like these, The Queen of Ice, or the earlier book of Devika Rangacharya, the stories from Raja Tarankani, The Tales of Kashmir, published by the Children's Book Trust, and other books that we have referred to, The Tale from Kashmir. All these are the illustrations of what Appadurai contextualizes in his study, Modernity at Large. What he contextualizes as upholders of Hindu nationalism. Appadurai considers Hindu nationalism as took out Appadurai. He considers it as a middle class and upper class project of cultural homogenization. Once again, let me quote Appadurai in Modernity at Large. Appadurai considers cultural nationalism, the Hindu nationalism, as a, to quote, a middle class and upper class project of a cultural homogenization. Indeed, Indian English children's literature is also a middle class and upper class project. So the Indian English children's literature's intended audience is the middle class and upper class young population, especially of India. Reconstructing a Hindu Kashmir is an attempt to dream of an unequivocal cultural and national identity. The obvious implication is to open up a discourse of Hindu nationalism that indirectly builds on to perceive the Muslims to be foreign invaders to Kashmir. And along with these works for children and young adults, you can also notice similar academic maneuvering for adults. As for example, we have Chitralega Sushti's Kashmir's contested past, narratives, geographies, and the historical imagination. Or you can have Shonalika Kaul's The Making of Early Kashmir, Landscape and Identity in the Rajatarankin. All these works construct an appealing sense of nationalism, contextualizing the tension between transformation and historical continuity. Is this construction of a nationalism in Kashmir a new phenomenon? In essence, we may say it is new. But when you look into it, a sort of constructing nationalism is evident in every Indian English children's literature. So I would like to trace how Indian English children's literature was constructed in Kashmir. There weren't, let's say, children's literature in native Kashmiri language. In fact, an anthology of Kashmiri native language children's literature was developed just recently, which has 2 volumes and published by the Sahitya Academy there. Children's literature on Kashmir begins with constructing the folk tales of Kashmir. In fact, by the end of the 19th century, it was the British man John Hinton Knowles who for the first time collected the Kashmiri folk tales. Later on, in early 20th century, Sir Oriel Stein also collected another version of Kashmiri folk tales. S.L. Sadhu in 1962, after the independence, published folk tales from Kashmir. In fact, the retellings of all these folk tales of Kashmir were the first children's books in Kashmiri Indian English. But following this tradition of folk tales, and I'm glad that our inaugurator S. Chitra spoke on folk tales and its collection. It's actually the basic fundamental work which is of interest to children in children's literature. Now, following this tradition, yet differing from it, Ruskin Bond's book for children, The Kashmiri Storyteller, published in 2000, is to be noted. This is Ruskin Bond's response to the folktale construction of Kashmir for a century or so. And the original manuscript, Ruskin Bond says, published it 40 years ago in 1970s. Ruskin Bond's confession in the introduction to this book is significant. He says, to quote Ruskin Bond, some 40 years ago, when I penned these folk and fairy tales, I used the medium of an old Kashmiri storyteller who, on a winter's evening, would light his ankidi, that is his shop, and entertain the children who came to his shop in the Landur Bazaar. To my disappointment, the publishers to whom I submitted the tales at that time were willing to publish them only if I eliminated the storyteller and his listeners. And if you read the Kashmiri storyteller, you will find the Kashmiri storyteller is a Muslim. To go back to the quotation, I retrieved the manuscript and put it away in a tin trunk because he didn't want to publish it without the storyteller. And the manuscript lay forgotten with other abandoned works and files of old newspaper cuttings. Later on, the famous author forgot all about it. A casual search into the trunk salvages the tale, and Penguin Publishers published it in 2011. And when they published it, Penguin considers the old storyteller and the children listening to the storyteller the most appealing part of the book. Kashmir in Ruskin Bond's Kashmiri storyteller and the tale there is something of the past, and it exists in our memory alone. The acceptance and publications now reveals how Indian English children's literature has grown and how Indian English children's literature has developed over the years from the overtly didactic tales to pleasurable narrations of entertainment per se for children. Over the years, the early attempt to construct a Kashmir out of the folktales and myths has given way to another sense of Kashmir. And the transformation is historical and political too. And it constructs different images of Kashmiri nationalism. By the way, are we running late, Dr. Matanki?
Some more time, sir. A little more time and
Okay. So I would like to, I know the practical difficulty of running a conference, even if it is online. And so yes, I will wind up because I know that you are running. I don't want you to start the valedictory function late because we have a British speaker and they would be very particular on keeping the timings. So I shall, let's say, eliminate many things from my talk, just hint at it. For example, now
thank you,
I would
sir.
like to move on to, let's say, other aspects of Kashmiri children's literature, not overtly nationalistic. For example, we have, let's say, the terrorism in Kashmir. And you will find how this terrorism in Kashmir becomes a very important topic, as it is evident in Paro Anand's young adult novel, No Guns at My Son's Funeral. I'm not going to elaborately discuss the work, although I was planning to do that, but I think I just want to hint at it. Representing Kashmir, where we cannot say it is not nationalistic because it promotes nationalism from not the hybrid nationalism or cultural nationalism that caters to more to religious nationalism, but to another kind of nationalism where it is to be truly patriotic is the idea of Paro Anand when she published that work, Kashmir, that I would like to hint at is how Kashmir is incorporated with ecological features. Kashmir standing for ecology, eco-critical reading. And that also is, in a way, constructing nationalistic principles or ideologies in Kashmir. The particular work that I wanted to speak on was Mariam Karim Alawat's Galla and the Hangul picture book, that a storybook that she published in 2008, which speaks of Hangul, an endangered species of deer in Kashmir, a protected animal. The story is set in the landscape of Kashmir, and it portrays the quiet life of we will find that the story portrays the quiet life in Tangtar Valley. The Tangtar Valley, and the narration establishes the intimate link between the panoramic nature and the violent disquietude set in the presence of the militant and the military in the backdrop of Kashmir. And in the story, you have Galla, a lonely shepherd boy. The boy has lost many cousins in a tremor. Earthquake is a frequent part of a Kashmiri life. One day, while coming back from the forest, Galla, the shepherd boy, spots a hangul, an endangered species of deer. The hangul is being chased by two wild dogs. The boy forgets about all the lurking dangers, the wild animals, the children's fantastic tale of an old woman character called Banbutia, who eats male children. The boy forgets about the military men moving about with guns in hand. The boy is determined to save the deer. He catches hold of it, hides it from danger, and acts risking his own safety. Later on, he releases the deer from its safe hiding. The boy takes the hangun out from his Farran. Farran is a traditional loose gown often worn by Kashmiri boys and men. And in the Farran of Galla, the hangun was safely ensconced the whole night. At this instance, a magical transformation occurs, and the hangul miraculously turns into the figure of a boy whom Galla recognizes as the spirit of the eternal snow, Sheen. And Sheen is pleased with Galla, offers Galla a boon. And what does Galla ask? He requests that there be no earthquakes in Tangtar Valley. And that is what the child asks for. Thus, children have often been exposed to the idea of Kashmir as a once idyllic place. And that construction also is, let's say, at the fringes of how that Kashmir is transformed to an unsafe tourist destination. Now, let me conclude. when we have so much of overt nationalism, hybrid nationalism, of cultural religious nationalism, I would like to recommend one particular book as at the last part of my talk. It is the book, a picture book, Hocus Pocus, written by Onaiza Drabu, a 29-year-old young Kashmiri woman, and illustrated by Ghazal Alif, a 24-year-old woman. In this book, Hocus Pocus, we have the story of a grandmother, Nayan, who takes two children, Billa and Munni, for a walk in Srinagar. And the grandmother stops by the tomb of the mother of Zain ul Abidin, Kashmir's former king. And this tomb of the mother of Zain ul Abidin was built around the period 1430. And the grandmother wants them to look at Kashmir's history. This is what she tells the children. Look at Kashmir's history. You see, they have been ruled by foreigners for 700 years of occupation. The title of the book is derived from a very famous Kashmiri phrase, Hocus Pocus. And Hocus Pocus may be broadly translated to who is she or who is he? Who am I? Who is she? Who am I? In the tale, Hocus Pocus, the grandmother teaches Kashmiri words. It is like, let's say, the first book for Kashmiri children. The Kashmiri words from A to Z is taught to children. But while teaching these words, instead of teaching A for apple, A subscribes to a Kashmiri word. And up from A to Z, while the children are taught, they are actually taught to identify with their own tradition and culture and their own food habits. This book comes against the backdrop of the rising concerns of Kashmir's demography, its unique cultural change that Kashmir undergoes today, even the fear that there would be an attempt to make the region a Hindu one. Now, while interviewed, Onaiza Drabu, the author, said, traditional ways of being Kashmiri are slowly losing relevance. And this book can tie Kashmiris to their roots. It can help children of this generation to learn their own history and culture and hopefully set them on a quest for their Kashmiri identity. To conclude, today, the biggest challenge for Indian English children's literature or India at large is to negotiate the religious tension and create an atmosphere that will be conducive for the promotion of fraternity among all classes of people, irrespective of their religious or political views. a scientific view of life, balanced with a spiritual measure as suggested by Gandhi and Tagore, may bring an end to the turmoil caused by hybrid nationalism. Hybrid nationalism, a concoction of a modern nationalism and religious nationalism. Therefore, before we adults think of planning to write children's literature, if ever we are, or before we read and appreciate children's literature, Tagore's essays on nationalism and Gandhiji's Hind Swaraj are two invaluable texts that can certainly cure us of the pandemic of little nationalism. Thank you.
Thank you, sir, for your valuable information on the collective viewpoints on children's literature from the lens of nationalism in India and geopolitical commentary on Kashmir. Now, I request Mrs. P. Shubhapriya, Associate Professor, Department of English, PSG Krishnamal College for Women, to propose the vote of thanks.
Good morning to one and all present here. It is my honor and privilege to propose the vote of thanks. We want to express our sincere thanks to Dr. S. Chitra and Dr. Anto Thomas for sparing their precious time with us and gracing the occasion through virtual mode. On behalf of the management, I take this opportunity to express my deep sense of gratitude to Dr. S. Chitra, Faculty and Head, Postgraduate Department of English, Untitled Centenary College, Royal University of Bhutan. Thank you, Madam, for sharing your profound expertise and knowledge with us on this special day on shift in emphasis from affective to cognitive domain in children's literature. Your speech was truly inspiring and kept us spellbound. Thank you, ma'am. You have highlighted how adults write and children read, and the portrayal of children's thinking is manipulated. Emphasizing the role of adults writing children's literature should be conscious and sensitive. I assure you, madam, that your inputs on rereading Blyton and Salman Rushdie will pave more avenues in research. Thank you, madam. You have opened the Pandora's box with several questions to think and rethink. I extend our sincere thanks to Dr. Anto Thomas, Associate Professor and Head, Department of English, St. Thomas College, Thrissur, Kerala. We express our gratitude for such an inspiring speech on reviving nationalism, Kashmir in Indian English children's literature. Thank you, sir, for sharing information and giving details about the forthcoming international conferences. Sir has highlighted how the tide of nationalism is presumed and ebbed out like a phoenix. Thank you, sir, for introducing several novels on Kashmir literature and the different aspects of Kashmir literature, especially about hybrid nationalism. Your speech was thought-provoking, and I'm sure a lot is going to come up after this speech. Without your contribution, this program might not have been possible. Thank you so much, sir, for being our backbone in all our activities and constantly motivating and inspiring us. I recall our founders with gratitude and salute Sri Govindarajalu and Srimati Chandrakanti Govindarajalu for empowering women and children through this great institution. I thank our chairperson, Sri R. Nandini, for their constant support in all our endeavors. I'm grateful to our secretary, Dr. N. Yashoda Devi, and our principal, Dr. S. Nirmala, for helping us to translate our plans into reality. I thank our director, Professor Balasubramaniam, deans of various capacities, controller of examinations, CTO, heads of various departments for their concern. I thank all the chairpersons of the day, Dr. R. Sumati, Dr. Bhuvana, Dr. Sajid Kumar Sharma, Dr. Pankaj Gogai, Dr. Nagarjun Mandli, Dr. Pallavija, Dr. Neela, and Dr. Sushma Mishral for their presence in online mode. I thank our mentor, Dr. R. Padmavati, Dean Academic Support and Alumni Relations, and Dr. Sushil Mary Matthews, Head of the department, who are pillars of support in all our activities. I thank the organizing secretary, Dr. V. Madanki, for coordinating and organizing international online seminar on recent trends in children's literature. I would like to take a moment to acknowledge the immense contribution of our dedicated and experienced faculty. Finally, a special thanks to our paper presenters, undergraduate, postgraduate students of both aided and self-financing Department of English, VH more. Once again, my heartfelt thanks to each and everyone who has contributed of their precious time towards making this wonderful day so memorable. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. The link to post feedback for the inaugural session has been shared in the chat box. I request all the participants to fill and submit the form before joining for the technical session. I repeat, the link to post the feedback for the inaugural session has been shared in the chat box. I request all the participants to fill in and submit the link before joining for their respective technical sessions. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Kavya. The inaugural session has come to an end. The technical sessions are about to begin. The participants are already given the Google Meet link for paper presentation. We kindly request you to use the allotted Google links to enter the virtual room for presentation. Kindly note that your presentation and attendance certificate will be shared after the valedictory session. I repeat, your presentation and attendance certificate will be shared after the valedictory session. The presenters can contact their coordinators for further assistance. Thank you all.